So welcome everyone to Digital Vino this Wednesday, and we had a bit of a trouble. I had trouble with the daylight saving time in US that we don't have here yet in Europe. But I would like to welcome Jill Barth. That we will talk more to just in a while. I will just do the intro, and then we will learn more about what she's doing as a wine writer. Okay, so welcome, Jill, and I'm happy to have you here. Finally, we know each other since a while now online, but I haven't really asked you to be a guest here before, which I don't know why. So I'm just going to let Jill present herself in a while. I just wanted to let you know that if you want to ask questions, you can do so, and I will see them here in the comments. And for the rest, just feel free to write anything you want in the comments if you have anything to ask Jill. So welcome, Jill, and I don't know, we would like to know a bit more about who you are, except for being a wine writer.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for having me. It is great to connect this way, not just through messages and online. So yeah, this is great. As you point out, most people know me from my journalism, my wine writing. I write for pretty much any of the wine publications for an English-speaking language, really for a global audience. I write about wines from around the world. So I am from the Midwest in the United States. I'm based in Chicago, but clearly I don't just stick to local things because it's not much of a wine region there. So write about wines from around the world. My background educationally, I have a communications degree and a background in communications, have worked my whole career in that realm. Prior to becoming a freelancer, I worked at a firm, and I've been a freelancer for around 10 years now and focused on wine exclusively since about 2015. So at this point, I just write what you see in the journalism, what people read as publications, and I also have some communications and content kind of consulting or writer in residence work within the wine industry.
Okay. So what made you kind of enter the wine world? Why did you get interested in writing about wine?
I've always loved wine since I was, in college, maybe a teenager, late teenager, early 20s, always liked wine. And like most people, just tasted, when I went to restaurants or things that I could buy at the shops or taking trips. My husband and I and our family, like our siblings, we love to travel and go to wine regions. So this is something that we've done as a part of our lifestyle for forever. And so I always had an interest in that. And when I first started freelancing, actually, I'm also a yoga teacher, a certified yoga teacher. And at the time when I first started freelancing, I actually went with that subject matter. I thought because I was, in this area that I knew something about. So I started freelancing and doing some editing work relating to yoga. And that actually led into writing about, at the time, you have to consider this was like 10 years ago, like green matters. It was like the word for what we call sustainability. And now I think even sustainability has gotten a little outdated. So through that, I was also writing about like these matters and also loving wine. So I have these interests. And then this is the layer that I think most people find fascinating. I've always also been a fiction writer, but I never made a living writing fiction. It was something I always did for myself, or also smaller publications, short stories and things like that. But I finished my first novel at this point, and one of the characters was a winemaker, and it was based in southern France. So I did a ton of research for this novel, including a trip that my husband and I took as a vacation, and we kind of like knocked on some doors and did some interviews. And so I had some information from this project, and so I pitched some places with actually kind of like interview profiles was where I started. And actually that's where I continue to write. And so that's really how it got started. That actually worked out really well. And it just, one thing led to another, and it all kind of came together. So it was definitely, building blocks over time, but that's how it looks today.
Well, that's cool. I mean, I read, I think ever since 2015, I read all your stuff, and I guess we got to know each other better in one of these writing groups. I don't know if it was the Italian Food, Wine, and Travel.
Probably.
Yeah. Or perhaps on Twitter. I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious because I see that you slowly have kind of become more and more into more and more publications, which is great. So what were the challenges when you started out to become a wine writer?
But for one, for me, it was a discipline, considering that, like many people starting out, some of the things I was writing, I wasn't getting paid much for, or sometimes not being paid at all, kind of in exchange for, space on someone's publication. So discipline, and also the commitment to tell myself that was an investment in what was coming next. That I felt was challenging, and I quickly told myself that it was an investment and that it was going to pay off. And with that outlook, I think it makes it more like feasible to sit down during the day when you have other things going on, that you feel should be happening, and to say, no, I'm going to write today about the wine. Also, frankly, tasting the wines of the world. It's, endless. The more I know, the less I know, and just kind of admitting to myself that I don't really want to chase certifications. I don't want to, put a ton of time into passing tests to prove that knowledge. Was a personal decision on my own. Rather, I kind of take what I learn and use it in my own way to prove it to myself. But making that decision was also hard because there's so many very well-educated people out there, and just kind of settling in like with my identity as a writer rather than, some other function of the industry. I think that was a challenge too, but now I feel really comfortable with it.
No, I think I agree with you there because, I did this sommelier course, so I am a sommelier, but then in the end you learned a lot, but it doesn't really mean anything because I'm never going to work as a sommelier, but it was good for the knowledge. But then I think the rest of the knowledge I'm getting hands-on like every day. And I also realized that in the beginning I thought like, okay, everybody do this, all these certifications, so I might have to do them too. But then I realized it's a lot of money and it's a lot of time, and it's actually, frankly, time I don't have to invest at the moment, because then I wouldn't have to be able to do all the other things. So I guess it's a choice in the end, and I think certifications are very good. Especially if you're going to work more in the kind of in the sales field or commercial field, and or with education. But I think also, like you said, I think you can learn what you need for writing anyway, without having to invest all this money in education all the time. So I think Lloyd is here to listen in. He's from UK. He blogs and posts mostly about food, but also some wine. So welcome. So another thing I wanted to ask you that came to mind when you were talking about how you started out now and writing. So, because I realized when I kind of actually got some possibilities to publish now, I hope they will come out. But I realized my difficulty is to write in a way that actually fits the publication and the editor. And I think also between the US world and the European world, sometimes it feels like there are different kind of models for how to write. So how did you see that as a challenge, or did you have any?
I think this actually is something I learned in my training prior to even becoming a writer. When I was working in communication, I worked with a number of clients nationwide. So as you can imagine, if they have, locations scattered across the United States. Those populations are going to be very different, and each client was very different. So I learned really at that point to shape the message to the audience. And so I already actually knew how to do that. And I really kind of cut my teeth in a competitive environment where, you know, a client could call and make a demand, and I was able to understand how to do that. And that actually really paid off. You know, I don't know that many languages, but I do speak French, and knowing at least the way that other people perceive the English language has helped me as well to write things like very clearly and use precise language, because I think sometimes we assume, and like you said, we have a guest from the UK, like we understand the English is not the same everywhere. So, you know, I try to think about a mindset of someone that maybe uses English as a second language as well, to just keep it like very easy to understand. I hope. I mean, I would even love feedback from some of my readers. If it's not easy to understand, I would like to know that, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. No, I think my problem is more that I have this academic background, so I think I get too detailed sometimes, which is.
I know our training does seep in, doesn't it? It's like we can't escape it.
Yeah. Because it's like when I write on my blog, I kind of probably write more loosely, or not loosely, but a bit more relaxed. But then I think as soon as I write for someone, even if I also write text for kind of wineries and so forth, it's like the training kicks in, and it becomes more academic. It's like I have to do this kind of layout, and then I realize when they read it, they find it too academic, which is true.
But it's also probably what makes you unique, because that's a very great background to have.
That's true. But I realized for more kind of relaxed articles, it can get a bit intense, perhaps. So how do you see that the wine world has changed since you started writing, and especially, I guess, during the last 2 years? We have all seen some changes. I don't know. Can you talk a bit about that? What's your impressions?
Yeah, I mean, personally, the last 2 years, I have a picture somewhere on Instagram, and it's actually now outdated, of a stack of notebooks that I kept. Like, here's like kind of what my notebook looks like. Those are all phone calls and Zooms and chats that I've had with people, which was always a part of my work day. But I think the ability to connect has benefited the wine industry for sure. You know, we all know that, I'm sorry, that's my dog. We all know that there was like, you know, a lot more wine sales, and we'll see how that all shakes out as the future rolls on. But I think this ability to connect virtually can only benefit everyone. It was a big part, at least for me personally, being, you know, working from home as it is. I just feel like now it's so easy to get in touch with people.
Yeah, no, I mean, the world has kind of shrinked in that sense, that it's much easier than only 2 years ago. I mean, because I think even if we were already very digital, people didn't really organize these kind of Zooms or live streams to connect, or other ways to communicate online. So I think it's really been a step forward. But if we then look about a bit about how, I mean, what people are interested in reading, or the content they like to consume, have you seen any differences in what magazines or people request, or?
Yes, I think that really impacted those of us that write about wine from a travel perspective. Clearly, that was kind of off limits. I mean, I have articles that I submitted to editors in March, like 2020 or February 2020, that never really made it. You know, maybe I got paid for them, maybe they got in the system, but it was like, nobody can write about travel. Nobody can take a trip. It's wasted space. And I think that going back now that we are traveling again, and many of us were traveling anyway during the pandemic, but I don't think that publications were writing about it if it was outside of the lens of COVID-19. So now we're coming back into that, and I'm curious to see just how it all plays out, because I think that's one of the most interesting things to read about. And I think as wine writers, wine travel is a huge outlet for us because it's kind of like a communal interest that most of the world shares. So.
Yeah, and then it's also a possibility to travel, even if you can't travel physically. You can read about what you could do.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
So let's see the next question. So I know we talked about what to talk about here in this in this live stream, and then I thought about it a bit more. So I actually wanted to ask you this question: just also for people who will watch this replay. So when you kind of start working on a story, how do you choose the story? Where do you find the inputs to?
What I often end up with is a quote something that someone said that, for me is like, okay, there's the thesis, if you will, like that's where this is going to go. And so oftentimes something someone said sparks a story for me. Also, what I do in the notebook, everyone that knows me will know about the notebooks because I don't record, I write everything down. It's kind of a habit. I keep a list like at the beginning of the notebook of story ideas that could have popped in my head during, like if I'm on a trip or just throughout, if it's just from my desk, like ideas, I read something interesting or I talked to someone interesting. And then I just leave that list there and either cross stuff off because I wrote it or cross stuff off because, it's not going to work. But if I know I really want to write about something, yes, I probably had that original source, but I probably need more sources. So kind of then I'll like suss that out. Like, okay, do I have somebody else that's going to talk to me? If I need photography, do I have a place that's going to send me pictures? What do I have to work with? Will be the next thing. And sometimes like a story will sound really great and then no one will want to respond or something, or for whatever reason. So that's kind of how a story takes shape on my desk.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. In fact, there's something interesting that kind of like popped in my head, like an instance of this. I was like hearing rumbles at some point earlier this year about kind of the like material shortage, like packaging, and the kind of like how things were starting to get slow in the shipping chain of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but in shipping. And I asked a few people, do you want to talk to me about this packaging shortage? And I got actually no's, like, I'm not interested. And then, a couple months later, it finally kind of came out in some other publications. And then I had like loads of people that wanted to help me write the story, which I did publish in Forbes. And I thought it turned out really nicely. And I made some new connections in the packaging and shipping world from that. But it's kind of the point where like sometimes the story won't come alive until you get all the right players, if you will, to participate.
Yeah, no, I realize also that sometimes, at least for me, you want a certain kind of comments and then you don't get them and then you don't know how to go from there because it wasn't what you wanted to hear.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Or what you thought you wanted to hear. So
that's true.
So I guess also for people who watch this, when we talked about how you choose a story, I must ask the question also, like, how to pitch. I mean, how do you? I guess I think also, at least with me, it was always a fear that I didn't pitch because I felt like, okay, they're never going to reply, or perhaps they will not like it, or they would just think like I'm not, I haven't written before, so
yeah.
I guess a lot of people think the same thing, that they don't do it.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the job is pitching, and yes, you're going to get ghosted, and yes, you're going to get told no for sure, definitely. Like that's, even if you have a great connection with all your editors, they're still going to tell you no sometimes, and that has to be okay. If someone wants to be a writer and be published, and I can say this applies to not only journalism, but I know this from fiction and probably in other areas where you'd write something. I don't know. My son's a student. You're mentioning academia. Sometimes you take your idea to the professor and they say no. this is not going to work. You need to go back. These things are part of the job, just part of the job. And if you've got some kind of shadow or insecurity about that, that's something you've got to work out, because it's just not going to go away. But it is a skill. It's a skill like anything else that you need to learn how to decide to sell your story. What's the most meaningful way to abbreviate that in an email, and to also say why you're equipped to do it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the story doesn't fit. One thing that people do all the time, I made the same mistake, is you pitch something to a magazine and they already have a contributing editor that covers that, or a staff writer that covers that. So they don't need a freelancer to do that. Yeah. So you've got to do your research and see, I went to, Argentina, I want to pitch this thing. They've got an editor that covers that. Why would they pay you extra when they're already giving that salary? So that's really important to think about. And also, like, places want to buy a story or commission a story, and your experience somewhere is probably interesting, but like no one else in the world gets to be like Jill going to the winery. So they might read it, but that may be just because they know me for some reason or know the winery. But this other audience that you don't have, that the publication has, they want to see something that is a story that will either interest them or make them aspire to do such a thing that you've done, or, put themselves in the shoes. So like you have to think about what a reader would want. And, maybe, your first person essay is really good. You got to find a home for it, but it's probably not going to be necessarily in all the wine publications, for example, because people want to learn about wine and how they can experience it.
No, that's true. That's totally true. I mean, I guess that's also the difference between having a blog and writing for a for a publication.
It is. And actually, I know a lot of people that just write their blog, and frankly, they're very successful. I don't think I can give you an example of someone that's actually that I'm aware of that's monetizing it in such a way, but many of people have other income streams, so they're not trying to monetize their writing. But the blogs are excellent. You can get some of the best recipes, pairing suggestions, travel notes, you name it. We have so many blogs that we read in common. I know, Katarina, you and I have sort of a similar, I think, group of people that we follow, and it's excellent. And they have complete editorial control. And so if they get hosted at a winery and they want to write about it, go ahead. There's no editor. They're the editor. So for some people, just focusing on a blog works really, really well. And there's lots of good ones out there, in my opinion.
No, I think so too. I mean, I also realized that it is very difficult to be used to kind of deciding on your own what you want to focus on, and then of course you have to focus on what somebody else wants, which is not always that easy. But it's interesting. It's like a learning curve. So for me, it's mostly that. I'm not at this point aspiring to make it my main income stream. So, but I think it's interesting. I mean, I wanted to do it for a long time, and I never did it. And then, kind of in November, December, I had this other friend who kind of got me in. She organized this kind of accountancy group.
Mm-hmm.
To stay accountant to each other. So I was like, okay, let's try this now. So I kind of started reading up and preparing and thinking about how I could present myself. And actually the first person I wrote to actually said yes, and I was kind of a bit shocked. So
it feels so good, doesn't it?
Yeah, but then as I said before, I do have this problem that I become too academic. So I have to I'm studying now or teaching myself how to be more the kind of fluency that I want, which is also interesting. It's a learning curve. So I'm hoping to become better at that. So I don't know. I don't think I've had any questions yet. I know that Evelyn perhaps had a question. Okay, so Armin Miller, I think he's a Swiss guy, a blogger, I think, a sommelier. I think he's watching on LinkedIn. He said, so which are your favorite places to travel to?
Oh, it's such a good question. I love to travel. My, I guess, specialty, if you will, the wines that I take it back. I do have one certification, a Provence wine master from Wine Scholar Guild. This wines of south of France. So many times, my husband and I will travel to France. We love to do the road trip from Paris to Provence and go to all the wine regions on the way. So, Bourgogne, the Rhone. We love to eat in Lyon. It's really a dreamy trip. I think everyone loves it. And then spend some time in Provence. So that's something I really love. I do enjoy going out to California. I love the weather out there in the wine country. It's so beautiful. I went actually to Italy. That was my first trip back to Europe after the borders closed in March. So March 2020. So 2 years later, I went back to Europe, went to Italy, and went to Umbria, which was fantastic. I really want to go back with my family and go do some of the outdoorsy things like the canoes on the waterways and hiking. It's just super beautiful. So, gosh, yeah, I love to travel. So I all sorts of cool places.
So which do you think are the, I guess Umbria is one of them because at least in my opinion, Umbria is coming more and more and there's so many different things to discover and it's still fairly untouched. But which regions for wine regions do you think are up and coming? Also
it's a great question. Totally agree that everyone should have their eye on Umbria. I think if they didn't have their famous neighbor Tuscany, I think they'd have. I feel like everyone would be going crazy to be in Umbria all the time and drinking their wines, and obviously you can get a pretty good price on those wines as well. So. Yeah, totally. I think that's very worth it. I'm also super interested in Austrian wines. Actually, over the pandemic, I spent a lot of time tasting Austrian wines and studying them from home. I'm hoping actually to go this year if it works out, or as soon as I can. So I really have my eye on Austria. Locally, actually, I want to put a little plug in for people that are in the United States. I go to Michigan every year for trips. I usually go twice a year, once in the winter, once in the summer. Really have my eye on Michigan, sort of a cool climate growing region locally. I have a favorite winery that I go to pretty consistently called the Blonde Winery. They're in Baroda, which is kind of near the Lake Michigan shore, like across from Chicago, if you will. And they're growing grapes, like international grapes. I think they've got 20 varieties and they've got this kind of nice, cool climate, but they're able to make some really cool wines too. So kind of my eye on that, and pretty proud of like saying a Midwestern spot that's close to home. And I think everything that Oregon's doing, they're not really up and coming, but like so key. Right.
Yeah, no, I think Oregon is on my list of places I in the future want to visit for sure. But yeah, they're probably not up and coming.
There.
So there was a question about, so do you like to write more about travel or more about wine and music?
Yeah. Well, everything is centered around wine. So when I write about travel, it's to a wine growing region, pretty much actually. I only just recently pitched a story. I don't know if it'll be published that has absolutely nothing to do with wine, but travel. Actually, I have 3 kids, and my middle son is a skateboarder and travels kind of around the country to different places to skate. And so I thought that's an awesome story. Like there's some really cool skate parks. So I have an idea to write a story about that. And it has nothing to do with wine. So, but wine for sure, and wine travel as it relates, and, food as it relates to, kind of trickles into my writing as well. I think it's hard to separate the 3 things, like food, wine, and travel. I think just they go together, and like people that have this sort of taste in their life, like all three of those things, like almost always. So
No, that is true. I mean, they're really interconnected. At least wine and food is very interconnected, and of course also travel as
yeah.
you go around to visit. So yeah, I think I kind of exhausted what I had planned to ask you. So is there anything else you think people should know about you, or you think it's important to know when you write about wine, if somebody is listening that would like to start pitching?
One thing that I think it's kind of eye-opening to me is I went to, back in 2016, at the time it was called the Wine Bloggers Conference. Now it's the Wine Media Conference. And there was really a welcoming environment with a lot of writers that really, they changed the name to media wisely because so many people make videos, podcasts, other things.
Yeah.
So being around this group of creatives that make content about wine was fabulous. And I went back to the conference again this year. It was out in Eugene, Oregon, actually. And again, had an incredible experience. I actually had a chance to speak there about wine writing, or actually writing for the wine industry is what it was called. But being surrounded by people that make content is actually super inspiring. And I'm pitching this because I really enjoyed it. I have no connection with it. I was a speaker, but I don't get anything from it. It's going to be in Italy next year. So I think if anybody really wants a beneficial conference as a budding wine writer, I would recommend that one.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I had to look that up.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, a lot of people are writing a lot about Europe and Italy specifically.
Yeah.
And France, of course, but
it's exciting.
Yeah. And I also think that Austria is up and coming. I mean, they're kind of Wines of Austria is doing a great job since a couple of years now. So definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to go back to Austria. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I know that there's some people listening in. Otherwise, I think I'm very happy that you wanted to do this short talk or wine interview, and I think we learned a lot of things. I did. About your point of views, and I mean, I know I also asked you before a couple of years ago, but it took me a long time to take your advice and actually do a pitch. But I do look at your the things you told me a couple of years ago, so I think that was great help. So yeah, if anybody wants to, otherwise you can connect with Jill, I guess via Facebook or Instagram or Twitter.
Yep. The best way, it would be like Instagram or Twitter, which it's at Jill Barth. I put that there. Or my website is just jillbarth.com. I am on Facebook, but it's like kind of my personal Facebook. Yeah. I share it with my husband. So that's the other, when you find me, we're together. So I don't really share as much wine stuff there necessarily. So Instagram is a really great way.
I'll put a link to your Instagram and the Twitter later on.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and I hope that we can meet in person. If not this year, next year, if you're having the wine blogging conference here in Italy, as I said, that would be a great opportunity. So thanks again, and see you soon.
Thank you. All right. Ciao.